as we've
Yeah.
talked about tonight, can I get one last question with you?
Sure, brother.
People are on this Caesar's Messiah is directly connected to people that deny Paul. A big argument that we hear with Caesar's Messiah is that there is a intentional, what they claim is that Josephus wrote the Gospels to be subjective to Rome,
Right.
which we've hopefully, if you've watched tonight, you've seen we've dismantled that ridiculous argument. But they also claim that Paul is a false apostle
Yeah.
because he, in Romans 13, is trying to tell people to submit to governing authorities no matter what. Have you heard this argument before?
Oh, yes, I have. Oh man, we could do a whole show on Romans 13, brother. We could. It's one of my favorite texts. I
Yeah.
love Romans 13. I don't believe it's descriptive. I believe it's prescriptive of righteous government to start with. But
Yeah.
um, I don't know exactly what you want to get into
Well,
right here.
just a quick question. I mean, you don't have to do a great exposition if you don't want to, but just
Yeah.
simply, do you believe that this passage is telling people that, the Romans of that day, that they were supposed to submit to the Caesars no matter what,
No.
or that even the people like, for example, us in the United States today, that we have to submit to the laws no matter what?
No. Of course not. And the simple explanation is center in here on verse. I'm looking at the screen on verse 3. Let's start at verse 3. For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. Verse 4. For it is a servant of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing, for it is a servant of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. Romans 13, in a nutshell, is prescriptive of righteous government. Now, I'm not this vigilante that goes around running stop signs and and all that. I believe in submission to governing authorities, even unrighteous ones, so long as they do not violate the Torah, so long as they do not violate Yahweh's
Right.
law. This passage of Romans 13 has to be describing a righteous government that rewards the doer of good. How do we define what is good? The law of Yahweh through the servant Moses, and a punisher of the one that does evil. They don't bear the sword in vain. Why do they use the sword, which is a depiction of capital punishment or
Right.
punishment in general? Why do they bear the sword? To carry out wrath or justice on the evildoer.
Right.
Now, that cannot describe, let's take for an example, this hot button issue, the American government who does not punish people that kill little babies in the wombs of their mother.
Right.
That's an evil action. Our government doesn't punish that, they fund that. Romans 13 cannot be applying to our government in that aspect right there. So Paul is not telling us willy-nilly just obey any Caesar, any ruler or
Right.
president that rules over you and tells you what to do. He is describing righteous and holy government here in Romans chapter 13.
Right.
Those that reward good and punish evil, kind of
So,
like the
so you,
Levites in the Tanakh.
oh yeah, I was just exactly going to say. So you would suggest that the reader of this would to point out and define what does the Bible call good,
Yes.
because that's gonna weed out whether you think it's telling you to worship or to be subservient and obedient to a communistic government who
Mhm.
has the opposite definition of good. So
Yeah.
if we get our definition of good from the commandments, from the Torah, from the law and the prophets, as God defines it, like you said, through the Levites, who also would fall into the governing authorities that are established by God, would
Sure.
be Levites if this was a Hebraic perspective. Now I know it's the letter to the Romans, so this is
Sure.
where I've seen some people try to say, well, he's just talking about Levites, that
No.
those are the governing authorities. But I'm like, well, he is writing the Gentiles, the Romans that have converted. So I
Yeah.
don't know if that's where I would suspect he goes to. But I love
Yeah.
what you're explaining, and I'm glad that you had the opportunity to do that, to
Yeah.
explain to the viewer, the reader that may be confused, that you've got to define what good is, and then you
Yes.
understand that if there is a ruler in your culture, in your nationhood, if you will, wherever you live, and he's not abiding by that standard, well, then therefore he's not You don't just subjugate yourself to someone that's telling you to go out and do something harmful to you or to others, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And
So
that's what Paul is saying right here.
Right.
Remember this, our listeners, remember this. Most people read Romans 13 as descriptive, meaning it describes how we're supposed to submit to any government. Romans 13 is actually prescriptive. Paul is prescribing how a government is supposed to act, and that we're submissive to that type of government. That's right. A rewarder of good and a punisher of evil. So if we did live in a civil body politic, kind of like in early America in the 1600s with the Puritans and things, they did reward good and they did punish evil. And so we would be fully submissive to that type of government because Yahweh has set them in authority. And so they would punish somebody for murder or adultery or theft or any of the other commandments in the Torah, but they would reward those that did good. They would look upon you as a good citizen if you observe the 10 Commandments.
So I guess a great Old Testament reference that comes to my mind is Nebuchadnezzar. So we have in certain passages in Isaiah and Jeremiah, he's being referred to as the judgment of God on these other nations that attacked Israel and mistreated Israel for many generations.
Yes.
And that's why, if you read the history of Nebuchadnezzar, he went in and he didn't just invade Israel, he invaded everybody. Like he took out the entire region. That's why we see, once we get to the book of Daniel, he's ruling over 127 different provinces, right? So he went in and established this Assyrian empire that had been formulating over time, plus Israel, and he dominated. They called Nebuchadnezzar King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Obviously, we know that was what the pagans chose to call him, but the scriptures didn't call him that. The pagans did. But the point is, Nebuchadnezzar, in one instance, Yahweh is speaking about Nebuchadnezzar as his instrument, his tool of judgment.
Yes.
On other pagan nations. But then Nebuchadnezzar gets prophesied to be judged by Yahweh later for his extremely prideful and wicked behavior.
Sure.
So, this is where, of course, Daniel is just trying to follow the Torah all the way through. He and the three Hebrews, no matter, and then their entire interaction with Babylonian Empire and Nebuchadnezzar. So I just think it would be silly to suggest, because people will try to take this passage in verse 2 where it says, that all authorities are established by God.
Yeah.
And you're like, we got to take some of this in the context of, what are we talking about? Is this an established authority that's doing good or evil?
Yes.
Even the evil ones that God said, even though they're evil, I'm going to use them to accomplish my purpose and judgment of other nations. They ended up getting the judgment of God as well because they were evil. Sure. Right. And then you see examples of people in the Torah not submitting to them and being rewarded for that and protected by God. Amen. So there is, context is so important, guys. And that's,
Amen.
Hopefully we brought a little bit of that to the topic tonight, because I know we should probably do an entire show just on people's objections to Paul.
Oh, man, I'd love it, brother. Yeah. That's one of my favorite topics. I love that.